But God is also a God of love.
Parties have always had respect for the institution of
For
marriage.
God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten
The religious
Son.
right is the most central constituency.
Whosoever believeth in him should not perish but have everlasting life.
My youth pastor and all my friends are saying, you have to go to a Christian college, you should go to a Christian college.
God is a God of love and mercy and grace and forgiveness. He doesn't want you to die. He doesn't want you to go to hell. He doesn't want you to go.
I believe he was worried that people would find out, that he'd get kicked out of school.
Christian colleges and universities are everywhere. You have them in the Midwest, like Wheaton College. You can have them on the West Coast, like Biola University, Azusa Pacific University, George Fox University, Seattle Pacific University. Down in the South, you have Abilene Christian University, Baylor University in Texas, Bob Jones University, which is a fundamentalist Christian college. Northeast, Massachusetts has Gordon College. Christian colleges and universities are everywhere.
Conservative, Christian, liberal arts, Midwestern, white bread, Harvard of Christian colleges.
A friend of mine recently said that at Wheaton I feel like I got a really great 19th century education. and I sort of agree with that, because when I went to grad school I found myself a little ill-prepared in the area of literature and literary theory.
The Christian college's mission is explicitly Christ-focused.
Probably one of the most stressful things about living at Wheaton was year after year, I couldn't get a roommate. No guys really wanted to live with me.
I would come home from class and I would kneel down on this rug in front of my bed and I would bury my head into my mattress, cry, like heaving, crying.
I remember waking up in the middle of the night with just full night sweats, just terrified that I was going to hell.
So I was, for the most part, left alone. It was a pretty lonely existence.
I was going to go to hell and burn forever. You know, I didn't want this, so yeah, I prayed.
I just wanted God to take it all away.
It was the worst sin. Being gay was the worst sin.
Homosexuals are just sinners who need deliverance from a perverted lifestyle.
The real struggles in the evangelical world.
That's what this organization's about, trying to get biblical principles back into government.
But it's amazing how that small subculture has had such an influence on the politics of the broader country.
We stand for marriage and families, which are the foundations of our society.
The religious right is the most central constituency of the Republican Party.
Evangelicalism has tried in multiple ways to say, here are the rules of life. And over time, it's made them simpler and simpler. One man, one woman, one service to God.
And that's where that fight exists in this particular locality of Wheaton College that is a huge pillar in affecting evangelical culture, which is a huge pillar in impacting a lot of what happens in this country.
I don't think, however, Christian communities are going to give up so easily.
We know where this train of thinking comes from, because I used to be one of those people.
They really don't want to have to go this next mile and say homosexuality is okay.
And then what does that mean for the freshman who's falling in love with her roommate and she's 18 and she can't figure this out, you know?
Every child imagines that their world is controlled by whoever stands over them. And in evangelical households, if there's a mother and a father, there's also a third person, and it's the calling upon God. God looms all around and is named constantly by the parents as somebody who is alongside and endorsing every decision they make. And the child wants to please those parents. They want to serve them, make them feel good about who they are. But the parents have a series of rules about whether or not you're going to be good, not only in their eyes, but also this ultimate authority that didn't just build this home, but built the entire world they live in.
Yes, I'm the oldest willing to be out gay person who graduated from Wheaton College. And it's an honor.
The history of evangelicalism has been one of trying to establish a network of spaces so that children never have to grow out of the Christian home. They move from place to place that try to recreate the ideal values, the ideal structures, even the ideal schedule of a good Christian home.
We had prayer meetings during the week, teens groups on Fridays. On Sundays, there would be Sunday school and then church service and then usually an afternoon activity before the Chinese kids went off to Chinese school. So I pretty much had my weekends completely set for me for my entire childhood.
Christians have understood that the practice of child rearing is an active, laboring, missionizing venture. Christians were incredibly effective at training children into believing, I am first a Christian. That is as foreign a language as anything. No one is born Christian. And so they are trained into that vocabulary. And in that training, they included very loud language of what you are not. You are not a person with this kind of desire.
So for 3 years, I'm attracted to my best friend. We didn't touch each other. Both of us thought it was wrong, and both of us lived according to our convictions that it was wrong.
So the evangelical child grows up, they graduate from even a public high school, but their parents know they can't send them off to some secular university. And instead, a lot of institutions were developed so that those students would never need to actually leave Christianity. They could go to another place that would reinstitute it even more powerfully, create right relation, create new dating scenes.
It felt like monastic communities in a way, that really close-knit, close-together experience.
Each of these institutions are mission fields. They're mission fields to reiterate at a different stage of life how important it is to stay committed. Why is it so important? Because you're precisely at the age of revelation and encounter, when you're most desiring inside to discover new things, feel new things. And these institutions say, we know you have those feelings. Let us remind you what you have heard for a long time. And if you forget it, you will again be working against God's law and against the plan that He has for our coming to a better world.
The Christian College has a long history and is deeply embedded in America's past. The first colonists were basically inhabiting a frontier. Frontiers demand a sense of mission, a sense of vocation.
From its earliest founding, the colonies on the Atlantic had a sense of destiny, particularly with the Puritans coming over in 1630. They had a sense that they were the righteous remnant.
They want to be a beacon to the rest of the world. This is what a Christ-like civilization, a Christ-like life could be like.
And it was the Christian college that was built to train ministers. It was also to train missionaries to send into the frontier, into the wilderness for evangelization.
I'm an MK, which means that I'm a missionary kid. I was born in Thailand, grew up in Malaysia, and my parents are missionaries. My parents moved to southern Thailand in 1984, even before I was born. They were doing church planting work among Thai Muslims.
A great sense of urgency spurred on these Puritans to build their schools, to train up their citizens. This was seen as a collective effort to build a godly commonwealth in which all citizens were educated in a very evangelical Protestant gospel.
It wasn't that religion was a part of my parents' life, it's that Christianity is all of my parents' life. So this is what they do, this is what takes up every day of every week, and it's an entire cultural environment that I grew up in.
At Harvard, the core mission was to train up young people to know Jesus Christ as their Savior. The precepts stated that a student was to be plainly instructed to know God and Jesus Christ, which is eternal life, and therefore to lay Christ as the only foundation of all sound knowledge and learning.
I don't ever remember not believing in Jesus. I never believed differently, because that was the world that I was in, and it made a lot of sense.
Yale stated as its primary goal that every student shall consider the main end of his study to know God in Jesus Christ. Most of the 200-some Christian colleges today would look to the Puritan college as inspiration. And so the Puritan heritage is still very strong. Today, that legacy lives on.
And I applied to only Christian colleges. I applied to the big ones, Westmont, Kelvin, Wheaton, Biola, Gordon. They also give very good financial aid to missionary kids. And so it was a very natural fit that I, as an 18-year-old, would go to Wheaton.
Jonathan Blanchard starts Wheaton in 1860. He was a revivalist, he was a reformist. Blanchard notably enrolled African Americans and women in Wheaton College at its very beginning.
So what animates the great social reform movements of the antebellum period, including the abolition of slavery, including the temperance movement, those are expressions of this desire to make the world, and particularly America, an outpost of the kingdom of heaven.
In 1860, Wheaton's motto for Christ and his kingdom was very much speaking to the dominant narrative of that moment.
These evangelicals actually believed that they could bring the kingdom of God here on earth by dint of their own efforts.
Americans as a whole believed that they were making their society better, that they were creating the city on a hill through human effort. And Blanchard was very much wrapped up in that confidence.
I'm a PK, and that means preacher's kid. My dad was a Presbyterian minister. They went to Wheaton. I'm a Wheaton alumni kid. We lived all over the country because preachers' families move a lot.
It was 1982 when my father passed away that my mother and I became born-again Christians and joined an evangelical church. In fact, the church was an all-Latino Southern Baptist church in Miami, Florida.
I grew up in the Chinese Bible Church of Maryland, which is in Rockville, Maryland. I was raised in the church. My father was a deacon at one point. As far as I've known, I've always been raised up in religion. God, Jesus, church, Sundays. It really was the only way of life that I knew until after I left Wheaton.
You know, I was raised sort of nominally Christian. We weren't churchgoers at all. When I was in high school, I decided to go to a youth group associated with Willow Creek Community Church, which is now a big megachurch outside of Chicago. And I really got involved in more evangelical Christianity there. 2,000 kids from all the area high schools got together, and it was very appealing. From a younger age, I was bullied all throughout middle school, all throughout high school. I was taunted relentlessly, so church was almost my refuge. You know, I was like, this is a group of people that have to love me. I'm surrounded by this wonderful community of people who don't do drugs and aren't all about sex and don't want to beat me up after school, and I play softball with and do all these things. Of course you're going to accept Jesus into your heart if everyone else is. It's very much this is a wonderful thing. It's not a bad thing.
I was born in Colorado Springs, Colorado, at the foot of Pikes Peak. Our family was not highly religious, though my father came from a fundamentalist family, and we were sent to Sunday school. At that time, Young Life had come into Colorado Springs, so I got very involved with Young Life. Young Life is an evangelical organization which was designed to bring high school students to Christ. And their way of operating was to come into the school, get to know the leaders. They would have meetings in students' homes. They'd have 60 to 100 people at these meetings. It's very active today. And that really was what brought me to Wheaton, because some of those leaders were Wheaton grads.
When it came time to choose a college, my youth pastor and all my friends were saying, you have to go to a Christian college, you should go to a Christian college. And I had met people who went to Wheaton, and I thought, well, if I'm going to go to a Christian college, I want to go to a good one. So Wheaton seemed the logical choice. It was sort of the best of the evangelical colleges.
So when I saw all of these peers from my church head to Wheaton College, which was touted as the Harvard of Christian schools, and all of the Asian parents, you know, oh, Wheaton College, oh, you know, it was something to really respect and to, you know, I was like, well, I'm not going to be a doctor, but if within the Asian Christian community I can do something to shut these people up and tell them that I'm worthwhile, then I'm going to do that, and I got in.
Right now, you can say, Lord, I give you my life. I give you my heart. I give you my soul. I want Christ to come in and forgive my sins and my failures.
Revival is an important part of this Christian history of our nation. If we think about the First Great Awakening, we find this explosion of faith, whether that's through circuit riders or camp meetings.
I think it's during the First Great Awakening, this revival that goes up and down the Atlantic seaboard in the 1730s and 1740s, that we begin to see the genius of evangelicalism, and particularly the ability to communicate with the public.
All over this place, God is speaking to hundreds and thousands of people. All of you that will come tonight and receive Christ and say, I'm going to begin. I give myself to Him.
In many ways, George Whitefield is the iconic figure of the First Great Awakening. Whitefield was an Anglican preacher, came over to the American colonies, and back in England, he had been trained at the London Theatre, so he understood the importance of the stentorian voice and the dramatic pauses.
Are you living a faithful life unto Him? If not, you can start tonight. Right now. Right now.
And as Whitefield traveled, he was able to gather these huge, huge crowds, and many of them make extraordinary efforts to come listen to him in the open air because there was no building large enough to contain the crowds. And in the 20th century, the counterpart would, of course, be Billy Graham.
But you come now and stand here as an indication that you're saying to God, I will trust Christ.
In both cases, they were inviting people to come to Jesus, give their lives to Jesus, and to be spiritually transformed.
I suppose I knew when I was a very young boy, but I didn't know what it meant.
I started to think that I was gay when I was probably around middle school. It was an idea that people put in my head just through the bullying.
When I was in high school and became, a born-again evangelical Christian, one of my most common prayers to God was to have God change me, right? To have God take it away, and take it away so my family won't hate me, so that I can go to Noche Buena with the family and nobody will hate me. Noche Buena is our Cuban family's Christmas Eve service and so forth.
I didn't have words for it, but I had some crushes on women. When I made advances, I was told there was something wrong with me. There was a young life leader that I was quite crazy about, and that didn't go anywhere.
I was very crafty. I would watch the Rosie O'Donnell show and I would learn how to decoupage. And I loved creating art. I loved color and beauty. I loved photography. And so I guess being artsy made you gay or made you a faggot, or so I was told.
I'd been a youth delegate to the Presbyterian General Assembly. The whole question of whether gay people could be members of the church was this big national news story. And I was a youth delegate. I spoke to it at a microphone. I was quoted in the Cincinnati Press. I went to the mic, the cameras, they're popping, the media is taking in what I'm saying, and I'm going, we shouldn't damn people for being homosexual. We should pray for these people and help them. Maybe the church could devote some money to build rehab centers to help them. And the minute I sat down, the first thought in my head was, I wonder if I'm gay. And then fast forward, 3 months later, I'm a freshman on Wheaton campus. Before the first quarter was over, I was madly in love with a girl on campus.
But then I had to think to myself, well, I can't be gay because I'm a Christian. Christians aren't gay.
Let's open our Bibles, please, the book of Genesis, chapter 1.
We as a church are creationists.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
He who made them in the beginning made them male and female.
Ironically, at the same moment Blanchard was starting Wheaton College, the first signs that this Protestant century might come undone appeared in the form of the publication Origin of Species by Darwin in 1859.
Evangelicals begin to shift ground. They're embattled by intellectual assaults. Many of them interpret the publication of The Origin of Species as an assault on their views of the Bible. If they take Darwin seriously, they no longer can take a kind of slavishly literalistic approach to the creation account in Genesis.
By the late 19th century, most American colleges are accepting Darwinian thinking and, if reluctantly, allowing their professors to teach the new natural sciences. Places like Cornell, Stanford, Johns Hopkins all of which are formed on this new scientific theory, are going to be welcoming of these teachings. And this is a serious threat to Blanchard and Wheaton College. Jonathan Blanchard was opposed to Darwinism from the very beginning. In fact, in 1871, he declared it to be the sickly product of a trifling intellect. So he was not going to budge on Darwinian thought. In his estimation, it challenged the supernatural underpinnings of Scripture, which he read literally. The Bible is something special to them, and they are going to maintain that at the core of their curriculum.
My sophomore year, I quickly developed a close relationship with a girl who was a year behind me, who was on the Ultimate Frisbee team. And it became this long, drawn-out process of trying to sort through what are these feelings that are going on here. I'd always had close, best female friends, but never had a language to understand what was going on.
In my junior year, one of my boyfriends was really crazy about me and really started getting very serious, and that made me uncomfortable, so I put a stop to it. Then his roommate started dating me, and we got along just really well. As it turns out, that boyfriend was gay, and he'd had a big crush on the other boyfriend that had a crush on me. Of course, he hadn't done anything about it.
At Wheaton, the dorms are gender segregated. So I thought, well, maybe I'm experiencing what men experience in prison. They're straight, but they hook up with guys because there's just not an alternative because of the structure.
And I hadn't made sense of it all.
I thought, well, maybe I'm having like the prison phenomenon, and when I get out, I'll be interested in guys, you know, but this prison thing is happening.
I didn't really know that gay women existed. There's some words that we use for maybe codependent, maybe I just loved her too much. I didn't really know what was going on, and I didn't have any language, I didn't have any context to put how I felt about her.
After my junior year, I went away to camp, and I did not hear from my boyfriend for a long time. It was worrying me. Finally, he wrote to me and admitted that he was gay. And at that point, I started having a little starting of an affair with somebody at camp. And so that was the beginning of knowing who I was.
There's something off about this, but I'm not gay, so that can't be what that's going on. I wanted to be around her so badly.
Part of you is like, I'm in love with her, and I just want to be with her more and more. I want us to ride off into the sunset together.
This is wrong, but the simultaneous feeling of this is so right that I don't want to let go of this.
It's only her. You can't be this. It's wrong. You're going to go to hell.
And so we always had this back and forth of not being willing to let go of our friendship, but at the same time being terrified by what was going on. There'd be ups and downs in our relationship as we tried to navigate how could we be friends but not give in to these feelings. And that went on for a good 3 years. I remember going to the prayer chapel and praying. There's something going on. I can hardly acknowledge it to myself, but praying about it and really praying that God would just make this easier and take away these feelings, and it not happening. It just getting more and more intense.
We had a pact, she and I, that we would tell no one.
Probably the hardest part being that it was all going on in my head by myself. And so this incredible loneliness and feeling of isolation.
I couldn't tell anybody.
What happens in the late 19th century is that you have this explosion of wealth for those in the upper tiers of society.
This is the Gilded Age, an age of industrialization. We see the rise of big business and very powerful businessmen who want to have their own influence in higher education by funding it, by building their own schools. The influx of wealth is astounding. Johns Hopkins University built on the money out of railroad profits at $3.5 million. Leland Stanford donates $20 million to start Stanford University. Duke University built on the tobacco monies of the Duke family, endowed with a $100 million trust. And perhaps most dramatic of all is University of Chicago, endowed by the Rockefeller family. These are very wealthy, powerful capitalists who want to advance higher education in a way that prospers them and their own industries. And so they are going to impose their will. No longer are churches or denominations holding authority and power over these schools. Theology is no longer the queen of scientific inquiry. Theology, in fact, is now sequestered, often in divinity schools or seminaries. Clergymen are no longer presidents of these colleges or required to be so. Businessmen who are funding these schools want professionals. Here are all these rich, wealthy industrialists who are building these fantastic new institutions, leaving the small Christian college behind. And so Blanchard and his peers feel very marginalized at this point, and he speaks to that marginalization. Blanchard writes, Christianity speaks now only in whispers in common school associations and in state universities.
My name is Paul Phillips. I went to Wheaton College in 1972. I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I have lived here for 30 years. I grew up in New Jersey and West Virginia, the son of a minister. I don't even remember the first time I went forward at the end of this church service and gave my life to Jesus. I'm sure I was probably 6 or 7 or something like that, very early, before I even knew what I really was doing. I rededicated my life on several occasions. Always prayed before meals, out loud. I knew a lot of scriptures when I was growing up. I believed it. I wanted to believe it, though. I was passionately, desperately in need of believing it because from a very early age, there was this something inside of me that wasn't quite what everybody else was, meaning the gay factor. I don't remember a day in my life where I didn't feel different, the other, outsider. I have always been called a sissy, a pansy, a faggot, a Nancy boy, a poofter, whatever. The fact that I survived, especially in a state like West Virginia, is always a bit surprising to me because it could have gone so the other way. I only applied to 2 colleges. I applied to Wheaton College and the Pittsburgh Academy of Art and Design. Those 2 schools were sort of a choice for me between, do I embrace this difference or do I continue to fight this difference? I realized that I was too timid and scared to embrace it. So I went to Wheaton College. When I got to Wheaton, I wasn't as apt to get called fag and queer and pansy, although I did, but it was never as vocal. It was never as hate-filled. I had been chosen to go on the Men's Glee Club European tour. I was one of 2 freshmen. It was one of the most exciting things I'd ever had happen to me. I was so excited. Maybe a month later, the president of the Glee Club officers and the director invited me to a meeting. And they proceeded to say, Paul, we've decided that some of the things you do, some of the ways you are just aren't masculine. And therefore, we think it would be bad for the morale of the tour for you to go with us to Europe. I was speechless at first. I just was like, you cannot take this away from me. No. This is my life's dream, you know. I'd never been to Europe. I was poor. I said, well, what do you mean? Your hair, it's so long, and it's just how you are. It's doing needlepoint on the bus, and the way you dress. I was absolutely crushed. They had performed in all the major halls throughout the country. I mean, they were status. They were the epitome of everything grand about music on that college. And to be told that I wasn't masculine enough and that I was a threat to the morale, I just remember crying as I was walking off campus, crying, tears streaming down my face. And I walked to the railroad bridge. I remember as a train came underneath me, screaming at the top of my lungs, how dare you? How dare you? I think I had that momentary thought of what would happen if I just threw myself off the bridge. After that train went by and I had screamed bloody murder into the wind, I remember walking back to campus and I very distinctly remember singing Amazing Grace as I walked back to campus, because I knew that it wasn't me, because I could see. I knew it. It's 1979. I'm in San Francisco. I walk in Golden Gate Park, and this young man crosses my path on his bicycle, gets off his bike and sits next to a tree, and I think, my gosh, he's adorable. And that's where I met Ron Romanowski. It turned out that he was a struggling singer-songwriter. He wrote a song called Lost Emotions. I was so moved by that song. It just spoke to me in such a simple, eloquent little way. And so I said, let me try harmonizing with you on that.
I want to hold him in my arms, tuck my head and cry. But with people all around, we simply say goodbye.
And that began 17 years of touring throughout the United States, throughout Canada, and it was a pretty spectacular time in my life.
I met you on a rainy day, but the sun's been out since. And I knew from that moment that you were my prince.
Funny how life is always a big surprise. I thought the man of my dreams would have blue eyes, and I thought you'd be taller. I thought you'd be rich. I didn't think you'd be moody. And at times... I'm very, very proud of what Ron and I accomplished in our career. We were the first gay concert ever in so many of these small towns throughout America. We performed at so many gay pride events, did so many AIDS benefits. And I'm really proud that we were working musicians for 17 years, that we sold over 100,000 copies of our albums. And it was an artist-owned label, and doing it all ourselves, booking it ourselves, running the record company ourselves. There were many times, actually, where I was amazed when I thought about how far I'd come, how this little kid from West Virginia who went to Wheaton College and got kicked out of Men's Glee Club was suddenly on stage in front of lots of people talking about being gay, singing about being gay, being political, changing people's lives, touching people's hearts.
He had been a senior when I was a freshman, and he was that guy who played the piano really well that was kind of famous on campus for his piano skills. Part of his concert patter was he would talk about the fact that he had gone to Wheaton College.
Whenever somebody would come up to me and say, oh, I went to Wheaton too, I'd put a W next to their name on the mailing list sheet.
And every now and then somebody would come up out of the audience after the show and say, I have to talk to you. I went to Wheaton College.
I wasn't sure why I was collecting these names even at first. I just thought, well, you know.
And he built up a mailing list.
After a concert, somebody came up to me and said, I went to Wheaton too, and I live in this area. And did you hear about the student that just walked in front of a train? And I said, no. And he said, yeah, there was another suicide. And he said, and I know for a fact that it was related to his struggle with his orientation. And it just stopped me in my tracks. And it definitely flashed me back to that time, there's many years ago, when I walked over the train bridge and looked down at that train going underneath me and thought, is this a way out? And I thought, I can't let this keep going on. Like, somebody has to do something, and maybe I'm the one. Because I'd already started collecting the names and addresses. And so I put together a little letter just saying, let's organize, let's do something.
Steve Thyberg and I were friends from my sophomore year, and we were roommates my senior year. He was going to be a groomsman in our wedding. Yeah, it'll be 25 years since he died because it'll be our 25th wedding anniversary. It was a very difficult day. It was surreal. We went into a dean's office and they told me that Steve had stepped in front of a train and we had to go down to the police station to identify his sweater. We went in this room and they pulled his sweater out of a bag and there was blood on it and it was his sweater.
In the midst of my sort of inner torment, I learned that a student who was a year older than I, Steven Thyberg, stood in front of a train and killed himself. The entire campus mourned his death. Nobody ever talked about the fact that he was gay.
They couldn't publicly acknowledge that.
Nobody ever talked about the fact that this was some sort of a struggle for him.
They handled it like it was a tragic suicide. We had saved a folder of things from the time when Steve died. And one of the things we found was the Wheaton Record, which is the school newspaper. And there are 3 articles in here about homosexuality, and this was the week before he killed himself. The title of the article is Homosexuality at Wheaton, Openness is Under Debate. I wouldn't want Wheaton College to be known as the Christian college where you can go to be accepted if you're gay, said sociology professor Dr. James Matheson. I mean, other things here, right? Students who make a conscious decision and insist on engaging in homosexual activity regardless of biblical principles and college standards will be asked to leave. And I believe he was worried that people would find out that he'd get kicked out of school. I mean, it had happened. Homosexual behavior is morally wrong as outlined in Scripture and is not acceptable for members of the Wheaton College community. My fantasy would be that the college would say, we don't want our students to die. I really do believe that we can't know why he did what he did, but that doesn't matter. He is who he was, and he was rejected for who he was, and that is wrong, whether he killed himself or not.
We had a newsletter, a printed newsletter that we distribute amongst ourselves.
I thought it was about time. I thought it was really a good idea that some recognition that there were gay people at Wheaton and that gay people were okay.
We wanted it to say Wheaton College. We wanted that identity.
I think it was a stage at which we were all just sort of coming to understand that there were others just like us.
Busy among ourselves. There were newsletters coming out all the time. Of course, we didn't have the internet at that time.
But in a lot of ways, I think it was a lot more about just finding each other and realizing how many alumni were out there that had this shared experience.
And it seemed like Gala was confirming this. It was a visible, concrete expression.
We got letters, cease and desist. We got told that we couldn't do it.
It was not accepted by the college.
And that made us want to do it even more, I think.
We kept trying to have some effect. We would put notices on the bulletin board in the post office, which would be taken down.
But I think it's important to remember those origins.
But it was an important step.
For all we know, there have been groups tried before that. We just don't know. It's important, I think, always to remember our history.
It was definitely the beginning.
If you read a lot of early 20th century evangelical sermons, they are filled with worries about two kinds of people: bobbed hair women and sissy men.
By the early decades of the 20th century, evangelicals were feeling quite beleaguered by what they saw as a drift toward theological liberalism, or to use the term of the day, modernism.
Why would they be so worried about a haircut and a flounce? With the close of the American frontier, the question of what is the laboring work going to be of men and women after we're done with building up the country? Is it going to be working in a factory? Well, a man or a woman could do that. What was necessary for men and women to do changed as the economic role for men and women changed. And evangelical ministers wanted to remind their public that even though the economic necessity wasn't there, the moral necessity to be a right man or a right woman is central.
A number of conservative theologians put together a series of pamphlets called The Fundamentals, reaffirming the virgin birth of Christ, the authenticity of miracles, the inerrancy of the Bible.
A coherent reading of scriptures meant that any ambiguity in the text, what are Naomi and Ruth doing together, has to now be obscured. Here's the right family. Here's what the head of the household looks like.
Anyone who agreed with, who affirmed the doctrines in this series of pamphlets came to be known as a fundamentalist. This is where the term comes from.
Charles Blanchard takes over the presidency from his father. Charles will assume really the temperament and the theology of his father. By the early 1920s then, Charles Blanchard has helped Wheaton become really the flagship of the fundamentalist movement as it is now defined in very clear capital F terms.
I think it was 1992. I'm in a gay bar in the Village, and my partner picks up this newspaper, and she goes, "You are not going to believe what I just saw." What? She says, "A bunch of gay people from your college are getting together at the March on Washington," which was coming up, and everybody knew it was coming up. The first thing I said was, "That's not my college. That's got to be the Wheaton College in Massachusetts." And she goes, "No, it says Illinois." I'm like, "Give me that," and I read it.
Please give a flamboyant welcome to Romanofsky and Phillips.
Thank you so much. Now that Bill Clinton is going to lift the ban on gays in the military, as he will,
Ron and I were invited to perform at the 93 March on Washington.
All that you can be, you can do it.
Since I knew we were going to be there already, I started putting out the idea to the Wheaton College Gay and Lesbian Alumni Group that maybe we could have a contingent.
There was no way I was missing that march.
In beyond.
We all gathered at a hotel lobby on DuPont Circle, which is the gay neighborhood in Washington, D.C.
I had pom-poms made in the blue and orange Wheaton colors.
I cared about that gathering more than anything else that weekend. I mean, I was into the march and everything too, but I was there for that gathering. I just couldn't wait to walk into a room full of gay Wheaton alumni. And that's how we all felt. I mean, it was just electric in that room. People were giddy. They were giddy. I can't even explain it. It's like you have all these adults who are just gleeful as kindergartners opening a Christmas present.
Once more, be all that you can. Be all that you can be. Be all that you can be. We can do it. Queers can do it.
We're different classes from different years. Many of us had never met before, but we had this in common.
There was a real sense of life, of joy, of, hey, we're doing something. We're mattering.
I just wanted to hear all their stories. I was so starved. We all were. You wanted to just soak it all up. We were all starved for this.
We're here in D.C. to show the world our power, baby. Oh, we are here. We're queer and we're here to stay.
I loved the fact that it was also Wheaton College, because it was where I started. And it was Wheaton that turned me into an activist, whether they meant to or not. Yeah.
Well, the 1950s was probably just what you think it was. You know, it was pre-60s. Things changed a lot after that, but it was very conventional.
But until the late 70s, there was no space that was obvious for a young person with homosexual feeling to go and say, I'm gay, and I want to connect with you as a gay person. That's a very recent ability to name it and then to pursue it.
I went to New York City to go to Parsons School of Design.
At that same time, American urban centers find more community for people who are identifying as having gay identity, experience, desire. That is an identity that has no coherence yet. No one is saying, I am a homosexual, hear me roar.
Being in New York was very freeing. I feel that was the year where I made a break from Wheaton.
But they're increasingly finding that their desire makes them want to also interact with other people, not merely as sexual partners, but as friends, that there are conversations to be had in those spaces that they can't get anywhere else.
Being at an art school, there are a lot of gay people there. So I was really beginning now to feel like this was who I was.
Over the course of the 20th century, a homosexual culture starts to emerge that is trying to find its own coherency, in part, again, as response to a world that feels inhospitable to it.
I came to a point where I thought, oh, this is crazy. I'm not sick, and I'm not wicked. I'm just a person, and this is, for whatever reason, this is how I am. So little by little, I just finally was able to accept it. But it was difficult.
Billy Graham emerges on the scene having just finished his training at Wheaton College.
In 1949, he comes to Los Angeles and he pitches a huge tent, which becomes quickly dubbed the Canvas Cathedral.
His crusade in Los Angeles awakens the nation to the power of his preaching and of his personality.
Graham proceeds in a trajectory to becoming religious celebrity in the 20th century.
Ronald Reagan will endorse Billy Graham and his ministry from the pulpit. We will see John Wayne, Gene Autry, many other kind of symbols of America endorsing Billy Graham's ministry. And I think evangelicalism is no longer in the shadows. It's not just in the mainstream, it is beginning to define the mainstream.
Politically, it's really Jimmy Carter, a Southern Baptist Sunday school teacher, the one-term governor of Georgia, who begins to lure them back into the political arena. In the course of the campaign, he talked about being a born-again Christian. Evangelicals around the country took pride in the fact that here was a serious candidate for the presidency who was not ashamed to identify himself as a born-again Christian.
Early into Jimmy Carter's term as president, several things were disconcerting to evangelicals. Jimmy Carter foreign policy was considered weak, but it was the social issues really that galvanized evangelicals and made them determined to bring in a new president in 1980. Jimmy Carter and his Democratic Party's endorsement of women's rights, the Equal Rights Amendment, and of course gay rights was of great concern to evangelicals.
Beginning in the 1970s, evangelicals increasingly used language of fear for the incursion of two major forces, the liberated woman and the homosexual.
Part because of what happens with the civil rights movement. The end of the civil rights movement, you begin to see the move towards women's rights. Conservatives believe that their moral structure is eroding away, and nowhere is that more important than with the passage of Roe versus Wade. When abortion is legalized, we begin to see the rise of people like Phyllis Schlafly, who's going against the Equal Rights Amendment, Jerry Falwell, who begins the moral majority. All of these factions of fundamentalists and evangelicals coming together are about trying to get back society to where they thought they were in the 1950s and prior to that.
We see a progression of flashpoints in the late 1970s that bring the religious right into direct conflict with gay rights advocates.
And one of the big things during this time period is Anita Bryant. She is the first person who really goes after the homosexuals in a different kind of way altogether and makes it a campaign that becomes a very big part of the religious right.
In California, protests start over gay rights. In San Diego, Tim LaHaye is among those pastors who will organize protests of these parades. John Briggs is a conservative assemblyman who proposes overturning the right of gays to be teachers in public schools. This stirs up the animosity, stirs up the energy of religious right activists against gay rights.
To me, it's the highest level of citizenship involvement to be registering voters.
We see Jerry Falwell form the Moral Majority as a way to teach Christian citizens how to get out and win the vote for the Republican ticket and for Ronald Reagan.
Gearing up for the 1980 presidential election, Falwell begins to catalog this whole spectrum of moral decay in America.
We hate homosexuality, and we must now reverse the trend which would normalize homosexuality as an alternate lifestyle. That is sanctioning what God has condemned. We must reverse that.
He gloms onto the gay rights issue as another symptom of moral decay in America that has to be resisted, and the person to do that, of course, in his judgment, was Ronald Reagan.
At every class reunion, there is a point where they take a class photo. Everybody lines up on the steps of some building, several photos are taken, and a little pad gets passed around and everybody writes their names. A lot of people asked about the baby, and we explained that it was a foster baby. We wanted to adopt the baby. We considered it our child, and we had named him Noah, man of faith. We were in the front row because that was the easiest with the stroller. And I'm thinking, this is amazing. Here I am with my wife and my baby, and this is going to be in the alumni magazine. That's amazing. It's going to happen. He's on the pad. He's in the picture. And I just can't wait for the alumni magazine to come out. It arrives in the mail, and I open it right at the mailbox, and I'm all excited, and he's not in the picture. He's been edited out. Noah, his name is deleted completely from the caption, like he was never there. I don't think I can articulate how that felt. I've never felt anything like I felt in that moment. There aren't words. There aren't words. It goes to a vastly more profound level when it's your kid. He would tie us together. This last name and that last name, this person in the middle with our names joined together, that would tie these two women together. And there's a part of me that wants to make them deal. I'm an alumnus. This is my family. My boys they just got born. That's all they did. I hung on to that magazine for a while out of habit, but one day I came across it again, and I just looked at it and I said to myself, Deb, why are you holding on to this pain? Let's get it out. And I threw it away.
Okay, Mr. Reed, I'd like to ask you a couple of quick questions. Are you with? This is Gay Cable Network. Christian Coalition. We're citizens of this country, too, Mr. And we
need to talk to Mike about getting an interview.
Well, we just wanted to ask you a simple question about the position of the Christian Coalition.
Yeah.
Why is it that you find same-sex marriage such a threat to heterosexuality?
Well, our position is the identical position of Bill Clinton. We believe that marriage is an institution between a man and a woman. That's Bill Clinton's position. It's Bob Dole's position. It's our position. It's a mainstream position.
So people of faith who are gay or lesbian are left on the outside?
No, I didn't say that. I said that our position is the same as Bill Clinton and Bob Dole and the majority of Americans.
Thank you.
Marion G. Pat Robertson purchases a television station in Portsmouth, Virginia, and has visions of a huge television network. He hires a couple of Assemblies of God puppeteers named Jim and Tammy Faye Baker. One thing leads to another, and soon you have the Christian Broadcasting Network, which Pat Robertson then used as a platform for running for the Republican presidential nomination in 1988.
You actually have not just a Christian candidate that comes in, but someone who's in the conservative Christian world come out and run for national office.
He actually comes in second in the Iowa precinct caucuses, ahead of George H.W. Bush, the eventual winner, and just behind Bob Dole of Kansas. Ultimately, Robertson drops out of the primaries. Robertson meets a young political operative by the name of Ralph Reed. Robertson says, I want to find a way to use the names of the people I amassed in the course of my run for the presidency. Reed replies with the blueprint for a new political organization called the Christian Coalition.
And the Christian Coalition is about how do we elect candidates who have our conservative beliefs.
Ralph Reed proves to be a very adroit political strategist. He recognizes the importance of grassroots organization, of encouraging evangelicals to run for local political office, school board, city council, but he also emphasizes opposition to abortion, opposition to gay rights as part of the political agenda of the religious right. All the while, Pat Robertson is sitting in the studio in Virginia Beach, pushing these issues on a national scale day after day. And this becomes a very effective mechanism for the propagation of the political agenda of the religious right.
One day I'm on Facebook, and I get a message from my friend Paul, and he says, I hope you don't mind, but I've invited you into a private Facebook group that is gay Wheatonites. Way cool. So I'm in. And I start reading all these posts from all these young people.
I went in, I was like, oh my God, these people are all gay, and they all went to Wheaton.
Posts are popping, and I'm delighting in it. It's back. It's back. It's resurrected in a whole new form.
We got a website out, we got an amazing logo, and momentum started growing really, really quickly.
And more were joining every day. We worked so hard back in the day to get one new member.
At Wheaton College, every student is required to attend 3 chapels a week. It's mandated. They take attendance, you're required to go.
Wheaton had invited Wesley Hill to come speak in chapel.
We thought just really further instilled a lot of the guilt and the shame that we experienced while we were there. That often leads to depression and sometimes leads to suicide.
He was going to present this concept, which is relatively new in evangelical circles, that you can be gay and Christian, but you must stay celibate.
The message shifted since I was a student at Wheaton.
They've moved to the point where it's openly acknowledged. Homosexuality exists.
And when I was a student at Wheaton, it was completely sinful to just be gay.
We couldn't stand by and just let some guy tell these students who were still inside this bubble that they were not okay being fully themselves.
This was, another destructive message coming from the chapel of Wheaton College.
We thought that this might be the perfect time to come out, so to speak, as an organization. A letter was drafted, and this letter was affirming you can be gay, you can be Christian, you can also find love, you can also be in a relationship.
And we made this plan to go onto campus and to face-to-face hand out letters to students, just in the hopes that if there was anyone that felt that they were isolated, that they were alone, that they were in the place that we had been just so recently, that they would know that they weren't alone.
These courageous brothers and sisters actually physically handed out letters to current Wheaton College students refuting this esteemed chapel and saying, hey, whatever you heard, read this instead.
You are not tragic, you are beautiful. Your creation is beautiful. Your lives are beautiful.
We went, so when students were coming out of chapel, we would be there. We split up the campus. We made sure we got all the dorms.
People flew into Wheaton to distribute the letter.
Imagine you've been in a space for 4 years where you've been trying to hide the secret about yourself. To go back onto that space with a letter that says gay on it. There's no hiding anymore. And it's not just doing that in Chicago. It's not doing that in Boys Town. It's doing that in the space where I felt most isolated and most alone. It was almost like I needed to go back to the place that caused me pain to find healing. For me, 4 years ago, I was the kid that needed that letter and that didn't have it. That maybe even if just one kid read that letter and for that reason could feel like they could last one more year, that would be all the reason that we needed to do it.
In a quieter moment, George W. Bush encounters a more personal Christian faith. He is counseled into this by a traveling evangelist, Arthur Blessitt, in the mid-1980s, and also Billy Graham. And this really turns George W. Bush's life around.
Now, he helped change my life. He truly did. Billy Graham helped me understand the redemptive power of a risen Lord.
From that point forward, he will really hold true and hold tightly to an evangelical faith.
Americans of both political parties have always had respect and reverence for the institution of marriage.
His whole conversion experience was sort of a stage set for his compassionate conservatism. Where he wasn't so compassionate, however, was in his support of the Defense of Marriage Act.
And we stand for judges who know the difference between personal opinion and the strict interpretation of the law.
This is the way that he ends up winning in 2004 because he makes gay marriage a wedge issue. So I think what we remember George Bush for 9/11 and the war, but you also might remember him for especially is the ways in which he helped to cement the opposition to gay marriage in the evangelical community in a new kind of way.
At the moment that we went on campus, we went live online.
I remember being completely attached to my phone that entire day as it was happening.
I had tears just rolling down my face the day that website launched.
It was just blowing up with all kinds of emails and texts.
When the website came up, I was at work and I started crying, it was like this wonderful moment.
The response was overwhelming.
And the website crashed, because of 16,000 some hits. That's mind-blowing to me.
It was one of the most healing, exciting things that I've been a part of.
I would like to think that we made a positive impact. If we saved a life, it's all worth it. This letter was opened up for signatures to allow any students or Wheaton alumni to sign as an affirmation of our stance.
So many names.
The class years span 6 decades.
And I'm glad that we have people who graduated in the 50s up to current times.
If it was hard for me growing up, I know it was not easy for them. So for them to come out.
We had a person sign, who was a professor in Iowa, who signed on behalf of her best friend at Wheaton who was gay and died from AIDS in the 80s. And he would have wanted to sign it, and I want to sign it.
I look at my class here and I get moved. I know that they see my name on that list, and it makes me happy that they now know the truth, because we went through this together.
A lot of them aren't gay. Allies.
I love seeing all the allies. To me, that's one of the more important things about One Wheaton.
That's what we crave at the end of the day, is somebody say, I am on your side. I am not fighting you. I take your side. We crave that. And there it was. Scroll, scroll, scroll.
When I see all the signatories, one of the things that moves me is I think, wow, these people don't hate me.
It's healing. It's healing.
At 44 years old, to feel affirmed by a group of Wheaton alumni just blew my mind.
I am 54 years old. That was a real long time ago. You'd think after all this time, you couldn't be as affected by it. It's an old wound. Hasn't it healed by it? It's just as fresh. And the healing is just as profound and poignant.
And that anyone can go, that can see this witness anywhere in the world, on any smartphone or iPad. You don't have to look very far to feel loved.
It's an annoyance that religion is so unable to adjust to the fact that there's a whole group of people who, through no choice of their own, are different and don't fit in. And someday, hopefully, they'll get it.
Christian colleges are not compelled by law to change. You can be discriminatory on religious basis. If you don't want to have somebody who's gay, you don't have to hire them. You don't have to employ them for anything. And as long as those kinds of statutes stay in place, it's very easy for Christian colleges and universities to just ignore where the rest of society is going and to keep their worlds intact.
Homecoming is always a time when the college as an institution welcomes back, celebrates its alumni. We are written out of that story. Gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer, Wheaton alumni are completely left out. We are liquidated off the collective narrative of Wheaton. And so why not celebrate ourselves, in the town of Wheaton during Wheaton College's homecoming and write ourselves into the narrative?
And I know they are wrong when they say I'm strong as the darkness covers me.
Homecoming was awesome. It was packed full of One Wheaton activities. We started with the Jennifer Knapp concert Friday night.
God bless you guys. Thank you so much.
You get to share your story. And as we do that one by one, before you know it, we've got a sanctuary full of people who aren't willing to let their story and their journey be rewritten. So I thank you for that.
We were on campus wearing our rainbow shirts, and it was really amazing.
Yeah, we're here as allies. We are so excited to see this group form. My mother went to Wheaton. She graduated in '48. I always was fascinated with the way she connected to other Wheaton alums, and I wanted that. And when my belief system changed, I thought maybe I couldn't have that. But now, this is one community with which I can. And obviously, we want our kids to be aware of all the full range of beliefs about a lot of things.
Shine bright in my life,
But I do have to say, walking around campus in the t-shirts, I felt a little strange, like, are people looking at me or something, you know? And I guess I admire the bravery of everybody else who's here.
We had Dyke basketball game, going to Saga, the cafeteria, the football game.
And welcome to McCulley Stadium for this afternoon's homecoming football game.
There's 2 full rows of us, and it's like, I'm not the only one. And honestly, I'm hanging out with the funnest people that are here. So I'm part of the cool crowd now. And it's just really this contrast between, in the morning when I was walking up by myself, everybody must know I'm gay. And this time everyone must know because I'm actually wearing the t-shirt. But then the difference between that and sitting in the bleachers with a whole community of people and being really proud of that.
I bought a t-shirt because you need numbers to be visible, so that seemed like a good idea.
I was sitting there at the football game and I see this woman walking up the stairs who looks like she's my grandma's age, and she's wearing a One Wheaton shirt, and it's like, oh my goodness, wow. And then she comes and sits next to me, and then to be sitting next to this woman, and she's a lesbian, and to be overwhelmed with this sense of someone's done this decades before me when things were a lot harder than they are for me. And to realize that no matter what I'm going through, other people have done this, and they've been doing this for a long time, and they're okay. There's something that's so amazing and overwhelming about that. Saturday night we had an amazing dinner, potluck, family style. I haven't had very much opportunity to be around older couples. I haven't had very much opportunity to be around lesbian families, and to be in such a diverse age group and to see how beautiful that was. To be there with people who are my age, my peers who I've known are out, and then to be there with people who've been doing this for a long time.
I'm Betty Johnson, graduated in 1964.
My name is Rebecca Axtell Litvin, and I graduated in 2000.
You know, I had to look up the word homosexual in the dictionary when I was at Wheaton. I didn't know what it was.
I was one of the first straight people on the secret Facebook group.
My first partner was somebody I met at Wheaton College.
I grew up in the evangelical America, and I tried to convert my babysitter when I was 4 years old and tell her about Jesus.
It took us 10 years from that point to yield, give in, say, yes, this is what we are.
I was always a very zealous evangelical.
And for those 10 years, we both struggled with what we were and what we thought normal was and how we should fit into normal.
I definitely had a lot of anxiety about if I didn't get the message of the gospel out to all the people that I loved, they were going to burn in hell.
But by the time we got to what was the mid-70s by then, Stonewall had occurred, the women's movement had occurred, and we had folks out there who were talking about what we were.
You have all of these different pockets of people, and it was just like, wow, this is like the family reunion I'll never like get to go to, because I'll never be able to like bring the family I hope to have one day to a family reunion like that. But like I can go to like a One Wheaton gathering and we can all like just get each other. And And there's a lot of beauty in that.
This is the Wheaton family. This is the reality. And everyone should feel comfortable being part of the alumni family, regardless of where their journey has taken them.
Never thought we'd get this far, and it's exhilarating to see young people free, and that's what I see.
I honestly think they're doing God's work, you know? I think they're doing God's work. What is it, Saint Irenaeus? He said the glory of God is human beings fully alive. Well, us gay people being fully alive, fully expressing who we are, who God made us to be, that's the glory of God. That's God at work. It is life. It is creation. It is the fullness. God didn't make us to just turn around and shut ourselves back down. That's not life. That's death.
Does it make me wish I were 20 today instead of 68? Absolutely. I'd love to do it again in a world where I didn't feel I needed to have the closet wrapped around.
There was a time when I did not know how things could get better. I didn't see any hope that I would come out and that I would lose my family and that I would lose my friends, but I had no way of imagining that things could be good. And then One Wheaton Homecoming happened, and you're there in that moment, and you're like, I never thought that this was possible. And it's really amazing.
I think what we're going to see is a lot of Christian organizations, Christian colleges, Christian universities doubling down on all of these issues as opposed to loosening up.
Martin Luther King is right. The strength to love is the hardest imperative of the Christian message. And the return to the question of homosexuality is, are we strong enough for it to change not only a Christian story, but a story of the West, of what it looks like when two people walk down an aisle?